Washington improved in 2025, but was it a successful season?
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. And just a quick reminder to all you readers out there, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that might be, please make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, from the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the show out a lot. Now, Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydays out there today. We're going to talk about all the highs and lows from the 2025 season. We're going to talk about the biggest concerns from the year and what they might look like moving forward, what you can be excited about going into 2026. But when you look at this 2025 season, going from 6-7, including the bowl game last year, to 8-4 before the bowl game this year, was that enough for Washington to say, yeah, this was a successful season? Because I think so.
At the floor, yes, but there's so much still to be left, out there for this team. Like, they should be 9-3. Let's just call it what it is. And we know exactly which game that was. It's a Wisconsin game. And, you have to hope that you look at Jedd's track record, what he did at Arizona year 1, year 2, and then blossoming in year 3. That means basically next year you can't have any games like that. You can't have these, close games or nail biters. You need to have those Purdue, UCLA games week in and week out. And I'm not saying run the table, but I'm just saying you can't have a Wisconsin-esque game like you had this season. But from an overall perspective, the number of freshmen that played, the transfers, everybody coming back, this was a successful season, but it's the floor of success, not the peak.
Right, because you won all of the games except one that you were supposed to win. And even then you could chalk it up to, it's not an excuse because you still should have won that game without a shadow of a doubt. But you could chalk it up to, so many guys got hurt in that game. The weather was bad, whatever it is you want to say. You won all the games that you were supposed to win, and all of the games they went to as underdog. Shout out to our good friends over at FanDuel. They lost those games. Now, the margin of defeat in those games is double digits, 2 possessions in all of those games. Where Ohio State, it was 1 possession game entering the fourth quarter. You could have left that game, and I know I did, feeling, all right, this is still, a team that's on the rise. There's still a lot to be excited about moving forward. Thinking about how many young players played in that game and how Ohio State wanted to attack that game, I feel like said a lot about what Washington was building, where things were going. The Michigan loss was just utterly abysmal. That was one of those things that I want to talk about a little bit later on, because between that and the Wisconsin game, with just how unprepared and how messy things were in both of those games, there is certainly a lot to be disappointed about. And then you can look at the loss to Oregon on Saturday, and while it wasn't enough, while it was very clear that you still have a ways to go to be able to compete with the top 3-4 teams in the Big Ten, it was very clear that the margin is not nearly as significant as you might think, because it was 3rd and 9 before that 64-yard touchdown to Malik Benson. If you get a stop right there, all of a sudden you have an opportunity to win the game. I'm not saying you're going to, especially with the way the offense struggled for the most part in that game, but even having that opportunity and keeping the game just within the margin of reach, let's say, because it was within reach for a very long time, that is still something that you can look ahead to and say, all right, with all of the young guys on the team, all the freshmen and sophomores who very clearly took big steps forward this season, with whatever guy you want to point to. I'm sure we have a lot of conversations like that moving forward, but with whoever you want to point to, it's very clear that the successes outweigh the failures, in my opinion.
They do, but the ironic part is you have an offensive-minded coach, and the offense was the problem in those games. You're talking about
Absolutely.
7 points against Michigan, 6 against Ohio State, and those are the cream of the crop of the Big Ten, and even in college football just in general. But for me, it's you hire Jedd Fisch to continue that offensive success. You have one of, if not the best dynamic quarterback in the Big Ten and potentially college football, in DeMond Williams, and it just never felt like he took that third gear. He got to second gear. If last season was, first gear, neutral, whatever you want to call it, we know what DeMond can do. We had the Rutgers game. We had, these games where he was near perfect and, showed both his run and pass ability that he could do it amongst the best. but when it truly mattered, he didn't. And that to me is, partly on Damon, partly on the situation. But, to me, like, that's why I'm like, yeah, it's a success. But, what changes next year that didn't change this year? Like, Damon had a full season as a starter now. So what is he a year better? Yeah. But is he really a year better or not?
Well, and that's the thing, but you can't, that's not a question you can answer right now. I don't think the point is wrong because there were points where it's okay. This is a game where you can show it's not just like, hey, we're gradually moving forward. It's a leap forward as you're talking about, like a first to third gear sort of thing. I think that's fair. But at the same point in time, this is one of those things where you bring it back to Jedd Fisch, and I'm glad you did, because as you point at Damon Williams, where he struggled in the Oregon game, there's no question about it. He said as much after the game, where there are no ifs, ands, or buts in that department. But when you look at it, where all of these things can now just sort of be considered learning experiences, where if you come out against, when Indiana comes to Husky Stadium next season, or when you go down to USC, or you go down to Oregon, like those are probably the three biggest games. Nebraska, probably the fourth one in that department. In those games next season, if you see this same kind of play and these same kinds of errors, then it's a problem. But right now, it's something that, you can still be concerned about. And I know I'm going to talk about that later. But right now, you can say, all right, these are some of the growing pains of a young team. Because I like to point back to something that, Jedd Fisch said when he first got here, when he talks about, freshmen playing. And it's, we want them to make those mistakes as freshmen. So by the time they're sophomores, by the time they're juniors, those aren't the mistakes they're making anymore. And I think that Damon Williams's, play, as it always does come back to at the quarterback position, for better or for worse, was just kind of the definition of the season. Because in the games he played great, they won. In the games he played poorly, they lost. Shout out to our buddy Christian Capel, who wrote about that over on Mont Lake as well, where that's one of the biggest parts of all this. But when you have a young quarterback like that, I think that is just kind of part of the ebbs and flows of trying to just grow as a program and trying to make sure that you can get over that hump. Now, again, if he makes those kinds of same mistakes next year, it's a much different conversation. And it's a much, more concerning conversation of what is going on with Jedd Fisch and why can he not get this guy over the hump sort of thing. But as of right now, for somebody who is still just very clearly maturing in some of these different ways, I feel like there's a little bit more of a margin for error because of just not his own youth, but the youth of the team around him as well.
See, I don't disagree with that, but the ironic part of that, I can't point to a game this season where you said playing freshman lost you the game. Like John Mills didn't, underperform in a game where he gave up 2 or 3 sacks, gave up 0. You look at the receivers, Raiden Reinsberg being out for, was it the UCLA game? They won that game. So it doesn't matter. Like you look at, and so like I can't point to a singular freshman and say that's why you lost, but as a collective, I can kind of, I hear your point and I don't disagree with it, but I just, like for me, it's why you're paying Jedd 7.5, 8, who knows what he's going to make end up, if things change like that. But you just kind of wonder, it's the unlocking Omari Evans. It's the playing the balance of freshmen and, not rushing Adam Muhammad in the Oregon game as much as he should have been, probably when you look back at it. Those are the decisions where it's, well, that's why you played Adam last season. It's why he played all 13 games. It's, you have all of these things. You had your offensive line back that you were going to have for this game against Oregon. And yet there's still a couple of pieces missing. So I guess the question is, what is Jedd going to do between now and next August that prevents it from happening again? Because to me, it's like he's not going to change play callers. That's not going to happen. So what is going to change in the dichotomy of the team that unlocks that next season?
And that's one of the things that I want to talk about in terms of what you could be excited about moving forward. Right after a message from our good friends over at Omaha Steaks. The holidays always feel a little easier when you already know the perfect gift. And Omaha Steaks makes it almost too simple. Whether you're treating yourself this season or sending something memorable to family and friends, Omaha Steaks delivers handcrafted perfection right to their door. And this week is the best time to jump in because their cyber sale is here and the deals are huge. The quality is exactly what you hope for. Incredibly tender steaks, rich flavors, and meals that make hosting or weeknight cooking easier. And the variety is underrated. Steaks, burgers, comfort meals, sides, desserts. It's one of those gifts that truly fits anyone. Save big on unforgettable gifts with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com for 50% off site-wide and an extra 20% off select favorites during their cyber sale. And for an additional $35 off, use promo code COLLEGE at checkout. That's omahasteaks.com. Promo code COLLEGE. Terms apply. See site for details. you bring up a lot of really good points regarding Jedd Fisch. And while I want to make sure that we touch on just his overall just shortcomings in terms of play calling and different things like that a little bit later on, you also have to look at him and say, all right, he's done a really good job in terms of talent acquisition and moving this program forward in that regard. And that's one of the things that, as I look at it, it's, yeah, you're going to have some more young players that are coming in next year, but combining that with some of these more veteran guys, some of these more experienced guys, as you wrote about over on Huskies Wire, Washington's true freshman played over 3,000 total snaps this season. That is something that, Jedd said it a couple weeks ago when I asked him about Champ Taulealea. The best way to get better at playing football is by playing football. And by seeing just all of these guys come along in that regard this season. And it's not even just the true freshmen. It's guys like redshirt freshman Paki Finau. It's guys like Damon Williams, guys like Adam Muhammad, just seeing so much more this year. Decker DeGraff being another one in that department. Drew as a party, another guy who, like, he's not necessarily considered younger, but if that guy decides to forego the NFL draft and come back for another year, that's another big win in that regard with just another really experienced piece. The more of those that you have coming back, which is something I did a tracker with a couple of weeks ago, and excluding Denzel Boston because it's very, very likely that he's not coming back, is you are going to have 27 guys coming back that started games for you. Not just played, but started. And combining that with some of these guys who have been such a big part of the rotation, the Chris Lawsons of the world, the Dylan Robinsons, I know he started a couple of games, but just guys like that who are just such a big part of what you were trying to build and have gotten so much experience this season in one way or another. That 8-4, which really did feel like it was supposed to be the floor coming into this year, it gets raised next season.
It does, and ironically, you said 4, it made me think of Jacob Manu and Tyreek Booter, those guys that you didn't have or for limited games had this season are both, barring a surprise, coming back next season. And so you look at pairing those veteran guys, like you mentioned a little bit towards the end of the last segment, and that young core of guys that we're really emphasizing here. That is why, like, what's the floor next season? 9-3 or 10-2? Because for me, it should be 10-2. Now it's a tough 10-2 that you're going to go against there when you look at the schedule and how it breaks down. But it's not overwhelming because I think, Dylan Robinson got one of those starts against Ohio State. These guys have been playing and starting in major key games. I think Dylan had 60 snaps against Oregon this past weekend. So it's not just playing in those games. It's playing meaningful snaps, being relied upon. Like Rylan Dillon Allen is another guy that I, kind of highlighted in the piece on Huskies Wire. And we've talked about for months here because when you look at the building blocks of this team, it's not just for 26, it's 26, 27, 20. You're building something sustainable, which, like Kalen had the chance to do, but I think Jedd truly will do, especially when you look at what's coming in the 26 class.
And that's a big part of this, right? Where you look at the 26 class, which we need to touch on since signing day is tomorrow as the everydayers are listening to this. It's the 26 class is a big reason for it. It's guys like Cody Green, Derek Coleman-Brusa, J.D. Hill, T.I. Umukais. It's 4 blue chip prospects in the trenches, 3 along the defensive line, which is what everybody is clamoring for. And maybe you're able to add one more. Who knows? We'll see how that works out. Maybe you're able to go out and make some big time additions to the transfer portal, which is absolutely what you need to do. And I think that this coaching staff and this player personnel department fully understand what they need to do to continue pushing to that next level. Because I would say that 9-3 should be the floor for next season, with 10-2 being the expectation, where it's okay. Yeah, it's things go wrong here, things go wrong there. It's a frustrating outcome, but an outcome that is well within the realm of possibilities when you look at the schedule. But I say all that because, again, it's not just you were going to have these guys who are no doubt going to contribute when you talk about those 4 guys that I just mentioned, plus several others. But you look at just everything regarding the growing experience on this team. Now that all of these guys are comfortable, I think Ryan Walters is a big reason to be excited with everything we saw that guy was able to do this season. Shout out to our buddy Evan Feather, the phenomenal photographer who put out a stat that was all the teams that were top 25 in scoring offense and scoring defense. One of them was worse than 10-2 on the season. That one team was Washington. So it's clear that all of the numbers and everything is right where they're supposed to be and right where you want them to be. I know there are several other metrics that have Washington in the top 25, top 20 in terms of just different regards, whether it be advanced, strength of record, whatever it is you want to say, which is all really exciting and all shows that things are going in the right direction. And the talent will continue to be there. I think that there are some questions about, things like a number 1 pass catcher, which I want to get to a little bit later, or just other things like that. But I think that in terms of the coaching staff itself, where if Jedd Fisch can continue to figure out these things, like we just talked about in the first segment, and continue to grow and figure out, okay, this wasn't working, but this is, and this is something that I can help Demond Williams with. I think that's something to not necessarily, I wouldn't say have faith in, but I think that you can have that expectation at the very least going into next year.
So I'm surprised we got through halfway of this segment without mentioning the name Alex McLaughlin. Like when you talk about defense,
that's my bad.
And me as well, just because when you talk about building blocks and everything and all the good points that you're making here, and the ironic part is two teams only scored 25 points or more against Washington this season. They're both at home, Illinois and Oregon. And Oregon got to 26. So you're not talking about like a 49. Like all of Jedd's three prior games against Oregon, 49, 42, and 49. Somewhere in that. They were all in the 40s. Now you're getting it down to 26. Granted, Jimmy Lake did have 26, 24, and 21. But
Oregon's offense also took a significant step back with Gary Bryant, DeCorian Moore, those guys being out, where they were held under, I think it was like 30 something for a much more significant point of the season than people were talking about, but it doesn't discredit what Brian Walters was doing. So to your point.
Yeah. And I think when you have the coaching staff in place now, where last season you were talking about Belichick staying for the bowl game and then leaving, and there was all those kind of uncertainties coming in, even though behind the scenes, we both knew that, changes were coming and things like that. Now you have this personnel staff knowing what Ryan Walters needs, knowing what Jedd now fully needs at Washington. They already did know, but just now you have a better sense of the depth going in moving forward. This is why the reason to be excited is because when we talk about the evaluations of the staff, it's not just high school guys. Like they rarely miss on transfer guys. Like you can probably count them on one hand. And even the guys that they missed on were more or less just guys that didn't contribute as much as we thought. Like Ontario Thompson, I think it's a success. Simone Peppa, I would have liked to have seen a little more involvement, but that's not a miss. That's just a snap and what do you want to find the fit sort of thing. But from every transfer that they brought in, they've all clicked. And so when you look at, Cade Eldridge coming back, what he's able to do, pairing Jordan Washington and Brian Bonner with Adam Muhammad as basically third year, those are so many reasons to be excited. It's just, wait, now we have to get through another offseason, because when you talk about like what's going to change, that's where the change comes in, and we can't project who's going to be in the transfer portal and things like that. I will say though, it is kind of fun to go through the PFF numbers and see which like FCS guys and G6 guys are standing out, but probably going to hit the portal just because if you're standing out at that level, you're probably going to cash in sooner or later. And so it's just a matter of finding out when, where, and then what does it look like come spring camp.
No, absolutely. I love where you're going with that. And I want to talk about one of those other transfers, because one thing I think that you can absolutely be excited about moving forward is the offensive line, because one of the biggest successes was Carver Willis, where I don't want to say there were question marks around him, because from the first time we got a chance to talk to him back in like March, April, whenever that was, it was, all right, this guy is very clearly going to come in and be a leader along this offensive line, and he's going to be a stable, just steady force no matter where he winds up. There was a while where it's, okay, do you want to just keep him at right tackle because that's where he played and had success at Kansas State? No, they moved him over to left tackle, and he was able to figure things out pretty quickly, which was really nice to see, because it was unfortunate when he went down against Ohio State. You could just tell that there was such a clear difference in the offensive line without him, and then losing John Mills against Maryland as well didn't help anything either. But it was just so clear that having Carver Willis was such a huge piece to this offensive line. It wasn't just that he added a stable force, it's that the talent around him improved, as we've been talking about with all of this, where John Mills, being what he was tremendous. I feel like we not only saw Landon Hatchett take a step forward this season, but we also saw Zach Henning prove that he can be a reliable offensive lineman for you, because you look at some of these other really good offensive lines around the Big Ten. They've got 5 really stable guys, but they've got a 6th, a 7th, an 8th who can rotate in, take some snaps when need be, and also just fill in at multiple positions if you really need that kind of help. I think Zach Henning showed that this year. Gieran Hatchett's on his way out the door, obviously, but as I look toward the future, Champ Taulealea looks like he's going to be a stud. It was very impressive to see what he was able to do. And we just had the conversation about Jerez Party. If that guy comes back, where you want to keep him on the right side, great. You can feel happy with that. If he does decide to leave for the NFL draft, all right, we saw John Mills fill in, play 2 games at right tackle, and play really well in those 2 games. All of a sudden, that's really great. I already said the name Cody Green. That kid is going to play somewhere next season. Where? Who knows? We'll see. But you have all the talent along the offensive line necessary. And now, as it continues to gel with Paki, moving into a starting spot, with John Mills, with Champ Taulealea probably moving into a starting spot. You can feel really good about that group as well.
Yeah, and kind of in a segue, tying all the offensive pieces together, who is next year's or the 26 class is Dezmen Roebuck, a guy that, had production in high school, maybe, blaze the list. How many receivers do you have cracked that? Jack Schaefer, if I made you guess who is that, last scholarship player to not burn that red shirt, but play this season as a true freshman, you probably go down the list a little bit more than you do to get to Jack Schaefer. But another guy along the trenches where I'm curious to see his one game against UCLA, what does that turn into next season? Like, you're not going to go into the portal really for a offensive lineman unless you have a surprise attrition, which I don't think either of us expect. But, when we looked at last season, you needed to go get Carver and Garrett, and potentially we were talking about one more. Now this season, it's just which one of those guys emerges, which 2 or 3 of those guys emerge, and what does the combination look like? Because I think it's a matter of who, not where do you get them from.
Now, let's be real here, though. Everything isn't sunshine and rainbows and perfect. Let's talk about some of the concerns we've got. Right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time. The World Cup is coming back to North America for the first time since 1994. And with 48 teams for the first time ever, it's going to be massive. But let's be honest, getting tickets is usually the hardest part. That's why the Game Time app is clutch, finally giving fans a real advantage when it comes to snagging seats. With Game Time, you can track price drops in real time, get alerts when great seats open, and buy tickets the moment they hit the app. It puts the power back in your hands and makes going to the World Cup realistic instead of impossible. All you have to do, you pull up the app, and the layout makes it so simple to scroll through matchups and compare seat views. Pick a game, tap a section, and have your tickets locked within minutes. No confusion, no hunting for fine print, and the seat view feature is a game changer. You literally see what the pitch looks like from your exact seat before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying World Cup tickets and every match, concert, or event with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app, make an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Game Time. So when we look at the negatives, I think that there is certainly still a lot of fairness that needs to be just kind of given in the Jedd Fisch calling plays and, the flow of the game against Oregon. You mentioned 14 carries for Adam Muhammad, who played the best game of his career in that matchup. Those are all things that I'm very, very concerned about moving forward. And I'd like to think that as Jedd continues to just grow and evolve as a head coach, that maybe he can go back to the film and say, okay, I understand why this wasn't working. I understand why that wasn't working. I certainly have those hopes, but I want to see it before I go further on that.
Well, and the kind of curious part for me is Jedd, with his NFL background, knowing Sean McVay, knowing Zach Taylor, all these guys that he has connections with in the NFL, how is it still a question at this point? It's not like, you're, not to throw some shade here, but Steve Sarkisian, where he had a cup of coffee in the NFL, but really has always been a college guy. Jedd's had extensive, experience in the NFL. So for me, it's what is, I guess, still missing for him. And again, I'm not going to beat this horse, but he's not going to not be the play caller. So it's not like you're going to go hire somebody like what, I guess, a la Chris Peterson with bringing in Jeff Tedford in 2016, where everybody credited him with, hey, he's the guy that unlocked everything. No, I think everything just kind of timed up well for that to be credited to him. But do you make a acquisition like that where, the NCAA has no limits on guys you can bring on staff? Jedd's got a Rolodex. Do you bring in a couple of additional analysts to add with Jimmy Doherty in the box and give, bounce some ideas off? Where Jedd's still a play caller, but maybe you got a couple more voices in that room and offer Jedd some suggestions, and then he kind of goes with it what he does.
And that certainly should be the case. We'll see how that works out. Just kind of moving forward, because I think that the one thing you mentioned when you said 2016 and Jeff Tedford, I just think of 2 elite receivers in John Ross and Dante Pettis and how much I loved watching both of those guys. I look at this 2026 roster and there is a glaring lack of a wide receiver 1. Now, with what we've seen from Dezmen Roebuck and the way he played this season, could he step into that role? Absolutely. I don't want to discredit that. Or Raiden Weinsbright, who started, as you mentioned, 11 games this season. The talent is on the roster. Chris Lawson could step up and be that guy. We could see, the guy who I always love to beat the drum for, Justice Williams, Rashid Williams, who was just unfortunately hurt all season. There absolutely is the talent on the roster to step up and take that spot, but it's just such a glaring need right now with such a concerning lack of experience, I must say, that I just wonder where would Washington want to go out and hit the transfer portal for a big time elite guy? Like I look at Nick Marsh from Michigan State, who entered the transfer portal right before we pressed record on this show today. Like I'm not saying him in particular, but giving that sort of example of this is the kind of guy that you are looking for. Just like that level of just alpha wide receiver one who can come in and hog 70, 80, 90 targets like Denzel Boston has, like Roma Dunze did. You need one of those sorts of guys. And my question is it on the roster or is it in the transfer portal?
I mean, I think this is why you brought Jedd and why Jedd came to Washington. You have the resources to go out and add that caliber of player. And if by chance Raiden outperforms him in fall camp and, gets that, you have that discussion then, not in the offseason. You go and get the talent and figure it out in the back end, because you can't have those questions in year 3. We can't be talking about this after the Indiana game, whenever that ends up being, and say, well, hey, because you didn't have a number one receiver, Dezmen, wasn't able to step up as much, or Raiden, was out for, or whatever the case may be. We don't want to go into those hypotheticals. Those hypotheticals that we talked about this season where, hey, you have the injuries and things like that can't be the issue in year 3, especially a receiver, given the amount of emphasis Jedd puts on that position. Yes, getting another high school guy is great. Mason James, I think, is going to, be in the mix as well, along with Blaise Vista. But you need a true and here's the problem, though. Did Omari Evans help this season in that respect, or was that a outlier example where you can say, hey, we just wanted a veteran in the room, not necessarily a guy that was going to be a 1A or even 1B? Given the usage that he had this season and lack thereof, I kind of wonder, do receivers look at that and say, well, how are you going to help me in that regard, given you had a veteran from Penn State who didn't necessarily have a ton of production?
I think that's a fair question. I think it's more the latter, because Denzel Boston was on the roster. Like if this was a Denzel Bostonless room, I think that the argument is, hey, what happened there? A lot like what happened with Jeremiah Hunter last season, but it's one of those things where last year you also had Denzel Boston on the roster. And we saw what that was like for the majority of the season before defenses were just like, hey, let's just take away that guy and see what else happens. So I think that is the biggest argument here, because if it's one of those things where, again, it's something I've talked about a lot, and I know we've had several discussions about over the course of the show, is Jedd's offense has always been predicated around 2 guys hogging the targets. Now, we haven't necessarily seen the extreme of that like we did with Tyrone McMillan and Jacob Cowing at Arizona a couple years ago, but I think that was one of the biggest things this year was we just kind of didn't see that, just that second guy even really emerge, where it was Dezmen Roebuck, right? He was that number 2 guy. And it was not necessarily by necessity, because he certainly earned that, but it was, I think they were hoping for more out of not just Omari Evans, but Rashid Williams as well in that same ballpark. And because just things happened the way they did, where Omari misses the first 2 games with an injury and missed a good chunk of fall camp with it too, it just felt like he was a couple steps behind. And then Rashid obviously has the collarbone thing, and then unfortunately hurts his hand right when he gets back. So you don't know what that looks like. That's why I'm not trying to run anybody else down when I say that. It's just, that is a really big question that you need to figure out. And the other one for me is, especially with Zach Durfee graduating and Deshaun Lynch graduating, where you've got Isaiah Ward coming back, you've got Jacob Lane coming back, and Russell Davis will be back after the torn patellar tendon, I believe it was. You have all those guys on the edge. But where is the edge pressure going to come from? Because that is the position where, again, we've talked about this a lot here. You look at the defensive line and edge in particular, that whole group is the hardest to recruit across college football right now. You have to be able to shell out big bags and just get instant production. Where is that going to come from in 2026?
The transfer portal. It has to. Because there's no slight to anybody, but you look at what Zach Durfee did, especially in the run game, you have Jacob Lane in that respect. But I don't look at Russell Davis or Isaiah Ward as those guys opposite of Jacob Lane next season saying, yeah, I can bet on you against the run. Like that to me, those are great speed rusher guys, but they still haven't, obviously Russell Davis had the injury, so that he's kind of a separate case in that. But Isaiah Ward didn't break through as much this season as I thought he might. So I look at that and think, well, you need to at least, I think the number's 2. You need to go get 2 pass rushers, 1 starter and 1 guy that could be at least at the bare minimum a rotational piece, because A, in the Big Ten, you have to have that number of bodies along the trenches regardless. And B, you don't want to say, well, hey, we're just going to lean in on Isaiah and see if it turns out great, awesome. But again, The same thing with the wide receivers. Don't let that be a potential. Just take out the question, put the number of guys in the room, and whichever one wins, great. Hats up to you. But don't let that be the question going into August, where who's going to be the guy that has the sack leader. I mean, I think I forgot who it was, but I think it was a non-defensive lineman. I think it was a cornerback, I think it was Dylan Robinson, had the highest pass rush grade of anybody on the team. That's the problem. And now that's not a slight to Dylan, but that's a problem.
That can also be a little subjective, though, just to be fair, because it is such a limited number of snaps. Like, I know you wrote about it. Like, Dylan Robinson had the highest run defense grade on this team. Like that, like those are things that can be a little subjective at times when it comes to Pro Football Focus. But to your point about the edge, I just want to run through some of the other names on the roster, because outside of the freshmen, where I think JD Hill is going to start at that outside linebacker spot, where I saw him on the field before the game, just kind of taking in that position very, very closely during his official visit on Saturday. We know Derek Coleman-Brusa can play both interior and on the outside. So I feel like you're going to see those guys there, but you can't just throw everything on their shoulders, where if they come in and earn that during spring and fall camp, awesome. You are more than happy with that. But at the same point in time, it's like you said, you just need to make sure you have more bodies in there. And that just allows Ryan Walters to do so many different things, because Caleb Smith, Victor Sanchez-Hernandez, same ballpark, right? If they come in and they take that step forward in spring ball and we're standing out there, it's, oh, wow, no, he looks tremendous for whatever reason that might be. Of course, you're going to be happy with that. There's no complaining there. But as you said, it's removing any doubts of, all right, which guy is going to step up? Because if you go get somebody with, let's say it's somebody from the MAC or whatever, who's got 10, 11 sacks, and it's, oh, okay, yeah, dude, that dude's been productive. Now it's a question of if he can do it in the Big Ten level. You're still taking a little bit off of his plate in terms of you have so many other guys behind them that are going to play in terms of some of these true freshmen. And at the same point, there's still enough of, we're going to rely on you to do X, Y, and Z, whatever it is. And we have these kinds of expectations for this kid coming into the season.
That's totally fair. And just I wanted to add this note, given that we made it basically through the entire show without mentioning special teams. Is Jedd going for it on fourth down every time next year? Just out of curiosity, because that is another, just for give me 20 seconds here. I think you do have to address special teams, because Grady's graduating. I don't know what Ethan's status is moving forward.
He's got 1 year left.
So that your kickoffs are set. But the field position that Jedd stressed so heavily this season has got to change. I mean, Grady, did what he did this past season, but I think you have to go at least add some competition in that punting room, because if you're going to struggle with sometimes some of these questions that we're posing right now next season, you're going to have to find that field position advantage, which you absolutely did not have this season.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank all of you for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, we're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday.